Good afternoon, subscribers. I hope you can see this board okay. Welcome back. I think this is my first video for quite some time, and primarily the intention here is to help my Year 11 class. That'll be Class 11E. And of course, I didn't get a chance to see you last week when we were going through the final preparation material for your trial exams, your mock exams. And so I wanted to just take this opportunity to record this video. Hopefully you'll be able to watch it before the exam, which is coming later this week. So here we're focusing on the final preparation task, that's preparation 3. And I'm just going to run down the questions and just throw out a few things which hopefully will help you and also enable you to check off some of the answers which you have already put together. So question 1. Define economies of scale. So I always like to remember that definition as those aspects of increasing size. So remember, scale means size. So those aspects of increasing size which lead to falling average costs. So you'll know from your studies of microeconomics, pages 84 and 85, I believe it is in the textbook, where we have the key determinants of economies of scale, so technical, financial, marketing, risk-bearing. I'll not get into all of those, but the general gist, as you know, is that as we get this increase in scale, cost per unit falls, and therefore average total costs fall. So I was saying to your colleagues in the other group, in 11C, I was saying to them on Friday, I was saying, why don't you just, if you get some sort of questions about economies of scale, it doesn't do any harm to draw a little diagram and to just kind of analyze that alongside of your answer. So last week, we talked about drawing a diagram where we would simply have costs on the Y, output on the X, and we talked about the cost curve, the A, T, C. And we talked about the fact that as output increases, at least initially, firms will benefit from this economies of scale. So output's rising, the company, the firm in question is getting bigger, and so costs are falling. We reach this minimum point, and then beyond that point, costs begin to rise. And we talked about the fact, we talked about this briefly, that that is referred to not as economies of scale, but as diseconomies of scale. Okay, something for you to think about there on question 1. Question 2, Black Middens Coffee Company. One of my favourite places to stop in Tynemouth for a coffee from Middens. But they use cups and lids which are fully recyclable. Identify the advantages and disadvantages of being an environmentally sustainable business. What an appropriate time it is in light of the COP26, and of course the focus of our assemblies for this week is also going to be COP26. But again, just think about coffee shops in terms of maybe Costa, Starbucks, all of the big retailers, and think about the things that they're doing to become more green, as it were, to become more environmentally friendly. So recyclable cups, recyclable cardboard straws, that type of thing. And why are they doing that? It is because the public, you and I, the consumer, well, we are much more savvy, we are much more aware of environmental issues and more likely to shop in organizations which themselves promote environmental sustainability. It comes back to our intent, doesn't it, here at college when we're teaching economics. We want to teach you the theory, but we also want to teach you kind of those moral and ethical dilemmas as well. So this is about being green, and I'm sure that you can come up with 1 or 2 advantages of being green. That whole notion of the public, the consumer is more environmentally friendly. Let's tap into that. And then how would that affect the demand from our product, for our products? Would we be able to attract customers from other companies who are perhaps less environmentally aware or environmentally friendly? Okay, question 3. Black Middens specializes in Tynemouth coffee companies. Black Middens Coffee, analyze the benefits of specialization. So this is a question which used to appear guaranteed every year. So on the old specification, you are pretty much guaranteed that this would appear. Before I run through a couple of kind of potential bullet points which you could expand upon to answer this, let me just remind you of the mark grid for analysis, because I think that's important. So when we're answering an analysis question, so this is analyze, okay? When we're answering it, have the marking grid in your head. So I'm picturing it as 101, 112, 123. Now what do I mean? So when we're answering analysis, there are marks awarded for knowledge, there are marks awarded for application, and there are marks awarded for analysis, obviously. And your answer could be limited, it could be reasonable, and it could be good. So it could be level 1, which is kind of limited, level 2, which is reasonable, level 3, which is good. I want you all to be good. Now, the question is, well, how do you get into the good? So I said to you 101, 112, 123. What do I mean? So 101. That means if you're in level 1, there's a mark available for knowledge and there's a mark available for analysis. Level 2 is 112. So that same initial point for knowledge, there's now a mark awarded for application, and then there are 2 marks available. And then level 3 is 1, 2, 3. So potentially that 1 knowledge mark, 2 application points, and then 3 marks for analysis. And you should be able to get into level 3 if you follow the structure, which we've been practicing, and which I have been showing you in recent weeks about doing our paragraphs with the knowledge. This means that as a result. So all of those kind of linking connectives and chains of reasoning that we've talked about in the past. So 2 paragraphs, remember that. And remember as well, a diagram is always helpful, even if the exam paper does not say using a diagram such and such. So this question's about advantages of specialization, or the benefits of specialization. So remember here, we're thinking about things like increased productivity, an increasing level of expertise, increasing levels of output, potentially higher wages if you're a real expert and a specialist in your field. So this is a fairly straightforward question. The answer is fairly straightforward as long as you put it into the context and into that framework which we've talked about before with the knowledge, the application, the analysis. Para 1, the knowledge, the application, the analysis. Para 2, hopefully that will take you seamlessly into the top mark band, the good mark band. Okay, question 4. The supply of Black Middens coffee is price elastic. Explain what this means and use a numerical example to support your answer. So the first thing I would say here, ladies and gentlemen, is that most people find price elasticity of demand pretty straightforward, but price elasticity of demand, I've got that the wrong way around. Most people find price elasticity of demand straightforward, but price elasticity of supply they find really quite challenging and quite difficult just to express in words. What are you asked to do here? You're asked to explain what it means. So that really means here, you can start off by giving the definition, or you could start off by giving the equation, potentially. So what's the equation for PES? So it's equal to the percentage change in quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in price. Okay, well, what does that mean if it's price elastic? So remember, price elastic means that your supply curve is relatively flat. And what does that mean? So that means that if you increase price from P1 to P2, so that's a relatively small change in price, you get quite a significant and more than proportionate change in quantity supplied. So that could be another sort of step to your answer. Relatively small change in increase in price in this case brings about a much larger, much more significant, proportionately greater increase in quantity supplied. Use a numerical example to support your written explanation. Okay, so use a numerical example to support your answer. So if it's price elastic, it means that the outcome of a PES equation will be greater than 1. So PES, remember, greater than 1, that means it's price elastic. So we could plug that into a formula and we could say, so let's think of a number greater than 1, let's say 5. So you could say that 5 is equal to the percentage change in quantity supplied divided by the percentage price. So I'm just going to give an arbitrary number here just to keep the math simple. I'm going to say the change in price is that it rises P1 to P2. I'm just going to say that's 10%. So 10% increase. So that would mean, do the math, that would mean that quantity supplied must be rising by 50%. So a 10% rise would lead to a 50% change in quantity supplied. So you'd need to put that into some sort of just a couple of sentences of explanation, really. Okay, let's move this up. I'll clean the board down in a second. So what we're being asked to do, or what are you being asked to do here? You're being asked to draw the supply curve. Okay, so you've got a set of data. Whenever you draw this data, you'll see, whenever you use this data to draw the diagram, you'll see that the supply curve that you end up with is relatively flat with price elastic. Don't forget to label, so that's y-axis, x-axis, and the actual supply curve itself. And then the final question, evaluate the extent to which consumers benefit from this price elastic supply. So a few things here before we get started. First of all, when we looked at our analysis question, this was the mark grid, 101, 112, 123. Now the grid for evaluate is 011, 112, 123. And to put that into context, here we go. So important to note here that there are no marks on an evaluate question for knowledge. Okay. Now that does not mean you shouldn't maybe give a definition because it's a good way to start an answer, but the mark grid starts at application. So we've got application, then we've got our analysis, then we've got our evaluation. And we're going from limited to reasonable to good. So that will be 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Now, you're well drilled in this, but let me just remind you anyway. This means that in order to get out of level 1, so in order to get out of the limited mark bound, you must give an evaluative statement. And I've told you about this before, so this is just a reminder to say that a good way of doing this is right at the beginning of your answers just to say whether or not something is or is not important. That's a good way to kind of start this off. And it also automatically ticks that number 1 evaluate box, which means that you can then hopefully, with the rest of your answer, you'll be able to proceed beyond level 1. So it's a strange sort of marking grid in the sense that you're being asked to do something quite sophisticated just to get out of the lowest mark bound. Okay, so looking at the rest of the grid, then it's 1 for application, 1 for analysis, 2 for evaluation in level 2, 1 for application, 2 for analysis, and then 3 for evaluation. Don't forget these 3 marks. Really, you're looking at, we've talked about this before, about doing a couple of paragraphs. So you'll have a paragraph with hopefully an evaluative statement 1 in it. You'll have another one with an evaluative 2 in it. And then remember, you're also going to come to your judgment as well. And that will then hopefully ensure that you can potentially reach that 6 out of 6. Coming back to the question, remember this is focusing on consumers, so make sure you hit the consumers part of this. We're also looking at the benefits. We need to be in context of the coffee company, and obviously it's to do with the price elastic supply. So I'll give you maybe one or two things that you could maybe talk about here, and you can obviously, you'll have your own ideas, I'm sure. So one thing that you could do is you could contrast this with inelastic supply, which would obviously be like this. So here's P, quantity supplied. So in this instance, let's say, you know, this is the supply of coffee beans or something like that. So at a price of 10, you might be able to supply 20. And at a price of 20, you might be able to supply 25. But the chances of maybe supplying 40 or 50 or 60, well, way off the scale here. So one of the things to consider is whether the elasticity of supply makes it easy or difficult to meet demand. So for example, in this instance, if the demand was, well, can we please have 40 coffee beans, that would be very difficult if the price elasticity of supply was very steep like this. So if it was very price inelastic. But we know that black middens is very, very flat. It's very elastic. And so it's much more likely that they would be able to supply 40 units, like so. But it's also an advantage to the consumer, coming back to the question, how do they benefit? Because here the price will only, it's a very marginal increase in price, whereas here, as I said, be off the chart here, so it's going to be a very substantial increase in price. So when the price elasticity of supply is elastic, it's much easier for the supplier to meet extra demand, and it also means that that demand can be met without very substantial increases in the price. So that's one good point. Now remember, when you're doing this, a good way to answer this is you'll do your analysis like this, and then you will evaluate, so you'll shoot this argument down straight away. So put your point of view and then evaluate, so shoot down the theory. So what might happen, for example, that would mean price elasticity of supply was elastic and demands could be easily met and price wouldn't rise by too much. Well, are there other factors going on in the economy? Are there other economic agents in the economy who could possibly intervene and increase the price? So it might not be price rising because of excess consumer demand, it might be another factor. So maybe the government might increase the taxes on coffee beans, and so price might shoot up, and as a consequence of that, consumers wouldn't be able to afford them as readily. So you need to think along, you need to be sophisticated here in your thoughts, you need to be thinking more widely. Okay, so as we said, you need a couple of graphs like that, and then you need a judgment at the end. And as I said, you can see in this grid, there's no marks here for knowledge, so things like definitions. But if you feel that just starting your answer with a definition that sort of gives you the springboard to launch into the rest of the question, then by all means do so. There's no harm in doing that because it only takes a line or two to write your definition. Okay, ladies and gents, best of luck with the exams. Hope they go well, and I hope that's been useful. If you've got any questions between now and the exam, obviously catch me at some point. And